Now realize that, look, if they leave, our town is dead. It's 28% of our population, but most importantly, it's half the children in the K through 8. And sure, that there are upfront costs involved with ESL programs and so on, but here are people who work, who pay taxes, who shop locally, more likely to shop locally than the natives. The downtown of St. James's has like a bunch of carnicherias, has a Western wear store, and that's where the Latinos spend most of their time on the weekends and a big chunk of their money. And that's bringing in revenue that wouldn't be there for this town. So in Hazleton, what happened in the 2005-2006 was that the then local mayor, Lou Barletta, who's now a congressman, go figure, made this a signature issue. And the sort of backstory they had this legislation called the Alien Responsibility Act or whatever. Basically, they made it, they passed a local law that made it a crime for anybody to hire an illegal alien, made it a crime for anybody to rent property to an illegal alien, and so on. And the weird thing about Hazleton was most of the Latinos that were there were either Puerto Rican, even though they were being detained. And in some cases, they were being processed for deportation, which staggers me, to be honest, because Puerto Ricans are American citizens. And Dominicans, people who lived in the New York area but had moved to Hazleton because cheaper housing and what they thought were job opportunities. But now you still have as big a percentage of Latinos in Hazleton, but you have this wedge that legislation has driven between the two communities. It's going to take a little bit of time to get over. The case went to the Third Circuit in Philadelphia, who struck down the law, said it was unconstitutional because it infringed on the federal government's right to legislate on immigration. And it went to the Supreme Court there this year, and the Supreme Court kicked it back to the Third Circuit. I won't bore you with the details of the case, but it's very interesting because they used a Chamber of Commerce ruling that they ruled on 3 or 4 weeks ago with respect to undocumented workers, and said that you got to reread the Hazleton law in the light of this. I don't think the Third Circuit, from what I know, it's based in Philly, so I've been there and I know some of the judges, not very well, but they're a pretty liberal circuit. They were going to basically strike the law down again, and it could go back and forth. But I spoke with the current mayor, who was the council president at the time that it was passed, and he voted for it, and he just wants it done because the money for the court cases that their legal fees were paid from outside groups, and those outside groups have long since gone, so now they're paying for it themselves, and they're not pleased. But generally, the phenomenon that one of my colleagues calls Hispanic boomtowns, has the potential to really transform small towns and rural areas, but there are huge issues in the beginning. And I think it's worth looking at the places where it's been successful and trying to distill what are best practices from them and getting advice about how you can go about it, because it's not easy. I mean, if your town has not changed ever really in terms of its ethnic composition, its cultural norms and so on, and then within 5 years, you suddenly have 25% of the population that is not you, and doesn't necessarily share the same cultural norms always that you do. You can see how this can become, a scary thing. Like sudden change is scary no matter what it is. So it's how you handle that change and how you build upon it. But the places where it's working, and I've talked to people in Maine too, as well as Minnesota, all say that, look, without these guys, we're done. And then, you have the states down south where, in Alabama and so on, that, in May of this year, the onion crops were rotting in the fields because the workers had all run away. They were afraid of whatever new law had been passed. And, they're going to places like North Carolina who have much more liberal laws. And, I think in many ways that kind of speaks for itself, that you can kill a town like Paulsville, Iowa, brought to its knees by an immigration raid in 2007. And, you have a situation where parents are being deported, children are here. In Paulsville, the church, especially the Catholic Church, has been doing most of the work, trying to shelter these kids. It's a minefield. It's a chimera of a policy because it's just so cobbled together at the local, state, and federal level that there's no clear direction. And I think a lot of people were hoping for that with this administration, but it hasn't happened today. So it's a good question.
Do you think that the attitudes that we have toward the achievers, seekers, is unique to the Midwest? These attitudes in areas like urban blight areas?
That's a very good question. We haven't done a companion study in urban areas, but we did say in the book, and people are actually starting to do work on this. I just was reading a piece on the plane that I'm have to review, where they're taking some of these notions and looking at rural areas and so on. I think, for sure, some of the dynamics are the same. I think the concentrated disadvantage in the urban areas makes it a qualitatively different set of propositions. So, in many small towns, one of the strengths that the small town has is that, a lot of the community resources can be tapped on by anybody, and that there is that sense of closeness that everybody knows everybody, right? It's not quite like that in the city. And I think what happens with a lot of our city kids is, they fall through the cracks because nobody's really paying attention to them, right? And then, we have institutions that are ready for them. Juvenile detention is ready for them, foster care, incarceration, and these are not the things they need. So, I think if you're working in an urban setting, you should be thinking about these things in terms of, it's more critical. I hate to use this term, but I think in many ways in education we look to evacuate the best, right? So how can we get them out? And in some of the schools, say in Philadelphia, if you haven't made it to one of the magnet programs in the public school system, we have a couple of outstanding magnet programs. It's just very hard to, because you have the kids for 6 hours a day, and for the rest of that day you don't. So how do you protect them? So I think so the overinvestment there comes from, wanting them to do well, but also wanting to protect them. So it's not that doesn't happen in rural areas, it does, but not to that extent. So I think the change in urban areas is going to be a lot harder to make. But I think it has to be because, again, the rate of attrition with these kids, these young, it's horrendous. But you're right, there's definite parallels between the urban and rural crisis, if you like, right? Yeah, I guess it is. But then, you could flip the argument and sort of say problems more exacerbated were the gross number of kids in a city, you know, like some of the rates of high school dropout in Philadelphia make your hair stand on end. Like, you know, even the state of Iowa is like a 3 or 4% dropout rate. But then, you know, the local high school we had, they had an attendance diploma, right? So show up enough. And our kid who was way down below the lowest, he was one of the attendance diplomas. He got his diploma, but it was for showing up. You don't have that in the cities. They just drop out. Yeah. Again, it's not easy. As you were saying that, I was thinking about Jeffrey Canada in Harlem and his wraparound approach, where, you know, he starts at the preschool level with kids and parents, and the program they have is, you know, you're randomly selected into it, but it's a wraparound program that takes them right the way through, from K through 12, right? And he underscores, reiterates, reinforces the role of the parents all the way through, from preschool to high school graduation. I think even in his attempts to do that, he would be, if you were to ask him this question that you just asked me, I think he'd say that this is the most difficult thing, is to sustain it. Now, I'm a sort of pragmatic person. I think you do what you can do, and I think sure, it would be great if people are reading to kids and all the things we know enrich them before they get into school. But there's still, you know, there's still gaps that can be made up in the school and beyond. And I think that if the least you can get is parental involvement in informed decision making at the key points in school. I think, you know, transitioning from middle school to high school, and then just before, you know, all the way through high school, the key decision points, right? That's a lot there. That's a great start. And, you know, I mean, it's not that I wouldn't worry about the other stuff. I think it's important, but it's truly important to, you know, empower all of our students. And I think the best way we can do that is, sure, you know, with involvement, but it's providing them the information they need to have to make an informed decision, because, you know, very many of our kids are not making those kinds of decisions. You know, they're just flying at whatever opportunity happens to go past them, and not thinking it through as these are the implications if you go this route. This is the implication here. This is what it's going to cost you. And, you know, to what end? They don't have to plan their whole lives out, but it's just having that information. I think parents can be a terrific conduit and a backup for kids in that. But, you know, that if I was to choose as to the key inputs that a parent can give, that's where I would choose.